Hi there, and welcome to today's daily devotion. Today's passage is Genesis 9, verses 20 through 28. Our passage today is a bit of a lengthy one for a 5-minute devotion, so I'm going to ask you to read it on your own today, and we'll spend our brief time together breaking it down. And it's a very complex passage for the time that we have, so we'll just pause the video, read it, and go from there. This is an event that resembles the fall in the garden, only this time it's in a vineyard. Unfortunately, Noah and his family inevitably fall into sin because even though creation was renewed, him and his family keep their inherited sin nature from Adam. And we see it rearing its ugly head here in the vineyard. Noah, we've been told, was blameless in his generation. His obedience up to this point has really been outstanding, and his sacrifice led to the promise of security for mankind in the future. So the question is, what in the world is Noah doing in a drunken stupor and cursing his grandson Canaan? Even though the flood narrative ended on a positive note, it didn't say that the future would be without any problems. Now, many here have been more consumed with Ham's defiance than with Noah's, but they're both in sin here. Drinking alcohol is not considered a sin in the Bible per se, unless, of course, your conscience is defiled when you drink, but drunkenness is always a sin. Why is that? Well, because it's incompatible with holiness. So the biblical principle when it comes to alcohol is this: alcohol can be a good friend at times for some, but it always makes a terrible master. And here in Noah's case, his drunkenness is paralleled with Adam's mistake in the garden. This is what theologians refer to as the second fall of Adam. But what about his son Ham? His offense is much worse than Noah's, but what exactly did Ham do wrong? Was it simply looking at his naked father and gossiping about it to his brothers? Well, Western readers of the Bible have taken it much further to say that Ham committed incest, either with his drunken father or with his mother while Noah was asleep. But since Shem and Japheth fixed their brother's mistake simply by making a covering and not looking at Noah in his nakedness, I think it's quite a stretch to say that Ham was guilty of a sexual act of some kind. So the question remains then, what was Ham truly guilty of? Well, this story gives us insight into the Hebrew sense of what's called propriety or decency. Exodus 20:26 says, "You shall not go up to the steps of my altar so that your nakedness will not be exposed." So it's not honoring of the father to publicize his mistakes. Sons were supposed to cover up their father's mistakes, and whatever the case was, the seriousness of Ham's mistake is shown on the curse that's pronounced on Ham's youngest son, Canaan. Canaan will be a slave to his brothers, and the Canaanites will be subject to the descendants of Shem and Japheth. To say the least, this is a prophecy of the conquering of Canaan by Israel, who is the descendant of Shem that is still yet to come. So the question again is, why was Canaan cursed and not Ham? Well, it could be because God had blessed Noah's sons in chapter 9, verse 1, and his blessing kept him from cursing Ham himself. Or it could be that the punishment mirrors the offense. Ham was Noah's youngest son, so Ham's youngest son, Canaan, is cursed. Or it could be that Ham's attitude is reflective of that of his descendants to come, like Egypt and the Canaanites, who were, again, notorious for all kinds of sin. So what we need to understand in all of this is that regardless of the various nuances of how this passage can be interpreted, one thing is certain: God is establishing how he's to be glorified in all future relationships to come. That's what the next chapter in Genesis really focuses on. So how do we apply this passage to our lives today? Well, I think gossip and highlighting the sins of others is really at the forefront. Certainly, honoring your father and mother comes into play as well, but I think I want to land on gossip just for a minute. Did you know that gossip comes from a Greek word that means to carry out the plans of the adversary? That's why it's such a serious offense in the New Testament church. So highlighting the sins of other people has a way of covering up our own and making us feel maybe better about the sin in our own life. Whereas James 5:16 tells us to confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. Notice it doesn't say confess other sins, other people's sins to one another, right? It's my sins that I'm to confess. So how do we share a prayer request in relation to other people's sin in a way that isn't gossip? How about getting the permission of the person who's in sin first? All that to say, we should be less concerned about the sin of other people and more concerned about recognizing and confessing our own sin. Remember, the log is in our own eye. So how can we remove the speck in our brother's without first addressing the plank in our own? So I want you to consider the offense that gossip is and examine your life in light of what we learned today. If gossip is carrying out the plans of the adversary, then we need to cleanse ourselves from being a gossip. Because gossip tears down and it causes terrible disunity in the church. So might we do the opposite? May we pursue the purity of the church by cleansing out gossip from our lives. If you wouldn't like that particular news to be spread about you, chances are that no one else would either. So the principle I apply to this is if the person isn't part of the problem and they're not part of the solution, they shouldn't be part of the conversation. May God bless you guys so that you can be one who builds up and doesn't destroy, and one who seeks the well-being of your brothers instead of gossiping and tearing other people down, and pursue the unity of the church. God bless you guys. We look forward to seeing you next time.